Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, excellencies, dear friends of the Martin Center, the think tank of the European People's Party, welcome to our event, Dawn of the Drones, on a very timely and relevant topic on disruptive technologies. I will leave the introduction into the topic itself to our welcoming speaker, and that's Ambassador Olof Ehrenkrona from Sweden, who currently is the Consulate General of Sweden in Mariehamn in Finland. He was, until very recently, an advisor to Carl Bildt as Swedish Foreign Minister. He's a member of the executive board of the Martin Center and also a policy advisor at the member foundation of the Martin Center, the Jarl Hjalmarson Foundation. And he was head of policy planning in the Swedish Foreign Minister's office in the early 1990s. Now, after him, we will hear the presentation of the key theses of the paper, which is being launched today. But I will introduce Henna Hopia later on then, when she starts speaking. Now the floor is for you, Olof Ehrenkrona. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. I will be very brief because I will have plenty of opportunities during the panel, so we will listen to Hanna. Let me just say that it's a launch of this report, Dawn of the Drones, and you will find it's about drones, but it's also about cybersecurity and cyber issues. And this might seem a bit strange because drones are very physical and cyber issues are only blips in the cyberspace. But it's not that bad, because disruptive technologies is actually not so much technologies. It should be seen as disruptive mathematics, because it's all about algorithms. It's all about mathematical formulas. We have been flying in the air for decades, centuries. We have been we have had model airplanes with actually managed by radio waves for a long time. And we have had programmable computers for decades. But the big thing now is the combination of hardware and the software that makes it possible to construct these drones. Actually, the first time flying was a software thing was actually when the Swedes developed its fighter Gripen. It was the first unstable aircraft. And it was stabilized by the software that was made. And this has now, of course, developed substantially. It's a report that I recommend everyone who is interested in the subject to read, because it gives a lot of the basics with regard to the drones. It even tells you why it is called a drone, because it was black and yellow, and it was used as targets for the military before. I will now leave the floor to Hanna. Welcome, all of you, and welcome, Hanna.
Let me just briefly introduce Henna Hopia, who is the author of this excellent report. And she was a visiting fellow of the Wilfried Martin Center. Besides that, she was, before that, she was for some time a journalist for Finnish Nykipäivä, right? Nykipäivä newspaper. She's also worked as a political assistant in the European Parliament and the Parliament of Finland. She actually ran for office for the Finnish Parliament once. She has regularly covered security policy topics, but also EU institutions and NATO. And last but by no means least, she is a valiant reserve officer of the Finnish Defense Forces. Henna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Roland, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's actually really nice to be back in Brussels. About 2 years ago, I spent 9 months here, then called the Center for European Studies, and President Wilfried Martens was a keynote speaker at the launching event of my paper then, so it's a really honor to be back here at the center now, renamed in his honor. So thank you for this opportunity and for inviting me. So, disruptive technologies. They are something that profoundly change our societies and warfare. Just like the discovery of fire or aviation or the nuclear bomb have, just to name a few. We are also now living in times of disruptive technologies. The internet and our dependency on information networks have brought on a new disruption, the cyber attacks. And information warfare has found a more effective vehicle than ever before. Military forces now recognize cyberspace as the fifth domain of war, in addition to land, sea, air, and space. Oops. Drones, or remotely piloted aircraft systems, have also become disruptive, as their technology has advanced remarkably. And increasingly more actors, both state and non-state, now possess them. Miniaturization and automation will further disrupt the setting. The US Air Force has estimated that the use of autonomous systems, sorry, how can I get that away? It disrupted me, yes. That the US Air Force has estimated that the use of autonomous systems will be the single most significant feature of military technology in the coming decades. So the idea of this paper was to discuss these disruptive technologies and how Europe is responding to them. And I focused on drones and cyber attacks because they are the most timely and also the most political now, if you will. They were also identified by the European Council in December 2013 as 2 out of 4 defense capabilities for the EU to focus on. So the world is becoming more insecure and unpredictable, and we are living in the middle of a hybrid war, which we find very difficult to fight. So what should we do? Firstly, drones. Over 70 countries now possess drones, over 50 with their own programs, half of those programs armed programs. All the big global players are developing medium altitude, long endurance, so-called MALE drones that can be used for intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, target acquisition and attack. In Europe, there are several multilateral projects by mainly the larger member states. However, we don't have enough surveillance drones to use in our own missions. In Libya and Mali, we had to rely on American drones. And the combat capability is lacking. In late 2013, 7 EU member states declared to create a European MALE RPAS community. Following this, the European Council decided that a European MALE drone will be created by 2020-25. And the EU has taken steps to prepare the legislative framework for this, which is needed as the member states still have different national requirements and standards. And the regulators are now working hard to integrate drones into European airspace starting already next year. Now, NATO has its own drone project as well for high altitude, low endurance, so-called HALE drones. However, these are American drones, so they won't directly benefit the EU's project. However, NATO contributes to the EU by offering its standards, platforms, and exercises. Now, unfortunately, Europe has fallen way behind in the technological race. The US and Israel are far ahead, and China will pass us in a few years. Investments in defense, R&D have not been made, and the economic crisis made matters worse. There are no EU research funds purely for defense, only for dual use. Also, the European defense market has problems. It's fragmented, driven by national approaches, And there are shortfalls, but at the same time, overcapacities. Our European companies are not reaching economies of scale, like in the US. With the lack of military programs, European companies risk losing their military expertise. As one expert I interviewed said, either we go for a European approach or we will not have a European defense industry anymore. So, to put it in a Brussels slang, maybe this European drone might not be the silver bullet, but it would surely help our industry. Besides helping our industry, why are drones so good? Why do we need them? In many ways, they have become unbeatable, indispensable. I mean, today, drones make up 40% of the US air fleet, so that tells you something. They can be deployed quickly, and they can engage repeatedly. They can fly longer than manned aircraft. They're relatively cheap, as room and safety for the pilot don't need to be considered, as there's no pilot. And they, of course, reduce own-side casualties. With drones, error and inaccuracy are reduced. The new cameras can zoom in extremely close without losing the broader view of the terrain, and a lot larger areas can be covered than before. Here there is a nice picture of the new cameras. So they are great in military operations for protecting troops, for instance, but they're also very useful for police and for border control, like Frontex, for instance, in surveillance and rescue missions. And they offer a huge potential for civilian functions, such as digital mapping, agriculture and forestry, monitoring road security, etc. And their commercial applications are endless. I mean, you could have a drone delivering your livraison. They offer a huge potential for growth and jobs. It's estimated that in the next 10 years, the drone business could be worth 10% of the whole aviation market. And that's 15 billion annually. So we are talking big here. The chair of the EU Military Committee has said that the drones represent a revolution in technology in much the same way the aircraft itself was. So in a nutshell, if the EU wants to be taken seriously and not fall into irrelevance, it must have a drone. Now, there are also some concerns relating to drones that probably have in their part undermined their proper launch in Europe. And these mainly come from the US or CIA covered operations outside recognized combat zones with civilian casualties, etc., causing drones their bad reputation. And it's also discussed, for instance, are drones less human than manned aircraft, or do their use lower the threshold of engaging in combat? Now, these questions have to be addressed, and lessons from the past have to be learned. Europe needs to have a transparent policy, keep decisions under tight democratic control, and promote international norms. And also, in addition to getting our own drones, hopefully, we will have to consider how, for instance, terrorists could use drones against us. Then cyber. The cyber threat is bigger the more intellectual property a nation has, and the bigger its industries are. So for us, the threat is quite big. Attacks come in many forms. Cybercrime is a major economic threat. Each year, the global economy pays about 300 to 400 billion euros for it. But it's also a weapon of war. It could be used to take down our whole critical infrastructure, maybe as a prelude to a conventional military strike. Indeed, NATO last year in Wales acknowledged that cyber attacks can threaten national and Euro-Atlantic prosperity, security, and stability, making a clear statement that the impact of cyber attacks could be as harmful to modern societies as a conventional attack. So hence, NATO decided to include cyber under the Article 5. Although basically all major powers have the cyber ability and have probably used it, the main states attacking the West seem to be China and Russia. Cyber attacks are an integral part of Russia's hybrid warfare strategy. Hybrid or non-linear warfare and network-centric warfare have been in the core of the Russian armed forces reform. The chief of Russian General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, has written about this new generation warfare, where war is not officially declared, where armed civilians are used, as well as conventional attacks and attacks in the information space. And it seems Estonia and Georgia were only testing grounds for Ukraine. According to a Finnish cybersecurity expert Jarno Limnell, war in Ukraine offers a model for future conflicts worldwide, where a cyber element will play an integral part. And as we have seen in the last few weeks, also terrorists are now using the cyber weapon. Here is a photo, if you can see it, from ISIS hijacking the TV5 Monde network. And the nice building behind it is from Finland's neighborhood, the Troll factory in St. Petersburg. So what is the European response to the cyber attacks? Member states hold the main responsibility of cybersecurity. Unfortunately, the cyber capabilities of the EU member states vary a lot. The big three, and also maybe the Netherlands, Estonia, Sweden, and maybe some others are doing quite well, some, like the UK, very well. But then there are those who are not doing well at all. And these gaps between member states lower the trust, and this prevents closer cooperation. This is happening both inside the EU and NATO. Now, the EU is trying to close these gaps. With the NIS directive, member states are required to put in place a minimum level of national capabilities, authorities, and strategies, enable EU cooperation and information sharing. But the negotiations have been difficult and, to my understanding, are still underway. The EU has also introduced some strategies, internal security strategy that will be replaced next week by European Agenda on Security, also the cybersecurity strategy, and now the High Representative, to my understanding, is working on cyber defense policy. I mean, there are a lot of papers around. However, the EU's focus is more on the civilian side, while cooperation in cyber defense has remained minimum. Here, states prefer to use NATO, if even NATO. And the EDA, European Defence Agency, admits diplomatically that military cyber defense on the European level is at a relative early stage of maturity. So a baby, basically. The EDA organizes some cyber defense cooperation, but this, to my understanding, really doesn't go very much further than the CSDP mission framework. So no real cyber defense cooperation or integration. So the member states don't even really know what cyber defense in the EU framework could mean. Also, the EU's institutional setting is very complex. Who does what in the EU is not clear. The EU is also blamed for not having a security culture. No serious cyber training, no protection, no permanent R&D programs for cybersecurity. Also, even though the question of privacy is very important, it sometimes hijacks the whole cybersecurity conversation, especially next door in the European Parliament. Now, NATO as a security organization tackles the cyber defense issue more naturally, of course. And after the cyber attacks in Estonia, NATO started to beef up its cyber defense capabilities. It has, for instance, rapid response teams that can be deployed within 24 hours to a member state under a cyber attack. The cyber element has been included into NATO's defense planning, including the use of force, and as mentioned, now also under collective defense, which sends a clear message. However, even NATO still has to develop its cyber defense, improve its early warning and situational awareness. And also the NATO has to work more on private sector cooperation and comprehensive approach. And NATO is now trying to think how to counter the hybrid threat. And I think here cooperation with the EU would be extremely useful. So, what to recommend? First of all, Europe needs to change its attitude, become less naive, face the facts, assess the changing security environment, and prepare for these threats. The EU has to become more strategic. I mean, we have talked about this for years. And maybe the new European security strategy would make a difference, hopefully. But that would have to include capability assessments and clear policy goals, not just describing the environment. Maybe we should also have a white paper on defense. Defense has to be discussed regularly at the European Council level, and more than just once in 5 years. And national decisions better coordinated, and member states have to stick to their commitments. The EU drone project has to be carried out and its dual-use potential promoted. On cyber, the gaps between member states have to be narrowed down. And the EU also needs more coordination between its institutions. I don't know, maybe we could create a EU cyber coordinator post, if there are not enough posts already in the EU. And also cyber defense needs to be taken further than just missions. More possibilities have to be given to the European industry, more investments in R&D, in defense, in technology in general, and also on the EU level. And we need more cooperation with the private sector, as they have the expertise and mostly also own the infrastructure. On EU-NATO, NATO can focus on the hardcore cyber defense and the EU do basically everything else. But as most of the member states are the same, we really do need more common training, joint planning, and permanent working level cooperation. I don't know, could we have Berlin Plus agreement on drones or something, maybe? We should also discuss cyber deterrent and offensive measures together. Who does what? And what do really the EU's defense and solidarity clauses mean? Do they cover also cyber attacks? And what would the EU do? Could PESCO, the permanent structured cooperation, be used maybe with cyber defense if not all countries want to go forward? These matters have to be cleared. And of course, Europe needs to follow and promote the international law and set a good example. We have to work towards common international terminology and norms in cybersecurity. And the EU should continue to train poorer countries to avoid them turning into cybercriminal safe havens. And to nail the hackers, I think on the international fora we need to discuss some new methods. Do we need a cyberpol or something, for instance? And lastly, we need to increase awareness on disruptive technologies, discuss the concerns, offer solutions. Technology should not be feared, but used and used well. The world will change anyway. The question is, are we only responding and adapting to it, or guiding and creating it ourselves? Thank you. How can I go to Kim?
All right. Well, thank you, Henna, and thank you for the frank talk about the fact that the EU needs a drone, Europe needs a drone, and Europe needs to prepare much better for cyber threats. Please take a seat here. Now, let me introduce the two remaining panelists that I haven't introduced yet. We have, to my immediate left, Ulrich Karock, who works at the Secretariat of the Subcommittee on Security and Defense of the European Parliament on armaments cooperation, research, single European sky, battle groups, and institutional aspects of the Lisbon Treaty. Except for the last aspect, that sounds very geeky, I like it. I like the Lisbon Treaty too, of course. And he also has been working with the European Defence Agency, the European Commission, and other institutions. He's also an engineer and a reserve officer. And last but by no means least, we have Michael Langer here on my very left, who is the Vice President External Relations and head of the Diehl, representation in Brussels of the company Diehl. He studied physics at Bonn University. We were sort of, so to speak, fellow students there. although I did political science. That's less geeky, actually. Then he went on to work as development engineer and program manager at Diehl's daughter company, Bodenseewerk. So we've got a couple of experts here, knowledgeable experts about the topics that we want to discuss. And I would like, since Michael Langer will have to leave early, unfortunately, I will give him the floor now and ask for a comment from the perspective of business, of the private sector, as it was mentioned in Henna's presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you for accepting me here. I warned the Martin Center that I have to leave because I think you have left out one thing. I am the vice chairman of the NATO Group Industry Advisory Group, and they are running studies, and one of the studies starts at 2 o'clock at NATO headquarters, and about 40 people are waiting there at 2 o'clock, so probably I'll be a little bit late, but at least I wanted to make
Put it on traffic.
Yeah, I put it on traffic or whatever, so I have good excuses. But I just really wanted to, first of all, appreciate this study. I think it's a very good study. I think also the idea to link it to disruptive technologies was a clever idea. I will focus on one or two statements on the drones, or as we call it in the EU, Airpass, remotely piloted aircrafts. And I think one of the main issues, or one of the main pages out of your report, I would say please look into page 18 and 19, because there one of the major things is important. There's a lot of discussions. I'm here now 10 years in EU business, and you know we have a lot of discussions on RPAS. We have discussions in NATO on mail and these kind of things. But I think one of the things which I always try to mention, and nobody really takes it serious, and that's why I have to do it today once again, is people don't make the right priorities. You know, if, for example, given one example, if I have to go to the NATO headquarters, I first have to get my clearance, because otherwise I don't get in there. So please, if you talk about Airpass programs, please, first of all, talk about a certification in the civilian airspace. Because to get frequencies for data links, it takes 2 or 3 years. It takes a lot of time, bureaucratic time, to really get it in the airspace. And all of the Airpass and UAV programs which are running now are more or less running. One example, of course, the privately small things, you know, you can run around here. But also, if they are run on military exceptions, you know. With military exceptions, you can always do it, but that's not easy to go. Yeah? So I think one of the most important things is really to start off with technologies, to put Airpass systems in the civilian airspace, and I think this is not a big thing. We have estimated in our company, we are running on these programs. We have some national fundings there, but the real EU funding is lacking, and we have estimated that takes something like 50 million or something. You know, that's not a big deal. People start to talk about the platforms first, which are hundreds of millions, but forget that this small thing is more important, and you can adapt that to any platform in the later stage. So I think we should have some kind of an EU edit or EU program which is running at a low stage, 50 million, whatever, 6 million, to run, to get accepted these military Airpass into the civilian airspace. Very important thing. So that's more or less my statement.
Yeah, very
sorry
clear.
to leave, but you know.
Clear and concrete statement. By the way, if you'd like to tweet, you're quite welcome to. The hashtag is #Dawn of the Drones, written in one word, Dawn of the Drones, as in the title of the paper. Well, let me now turn to Ulrich Karock as the representative of the European institutions in this context here, and ask him for a commentary on Henna's paper, but maybe also to specifically address the question of, well, you know, if it's such an easy thing, and not so expensive to put drones or RPAS into the civilian airspace. Why hasn't it happened yet?
So yeah, that's a very good question. Why hasn't this happened yet in Europe is, well, we don't have a European level defense exception, so it's only member states doing it. It's like in the US is doing it, in Israel. They all fly under this defense exception, and that is, of course, very comfortable because you don't have to abide by the rules that are required for civilian aviation and for the airspace that we're all using. And I'm very happy that I learned something today about the origin of drones, because once when I was in the Navy, I was a gunner shooting at these yellow and black things. And this is the second element maybe we have to look at. Today's drones are more or less large motor gliders. So from a military point of view, they are good for asymmetric warfare. But the moment where my opponent has potent air defense systems, we can forget about most of the drones. And there are videos around from the southeast of Europe where you see a drone that looks into the eyes of an air defense fighter, and a moment later the drone switches off, and you know what happened in this moment. So we are at the dawn of a technology, but we are still at a relatively low level of technology. And that might have been one of the reasons why in Europe we didn't take it so as being so important so far. Then we started at the European level to look at how we can get a single European sky, how we can get our things together in Europe. That was about 10 years ago. And there was a group of personalities that has already given some ideas how this should happen. Around 2000, it's almost 15 years ago now. And what happened then is that instead of having, and that was a suggestion, a strong civil military regulator taking this up, the legal language turned into to have a strong community regulator. And everybody who's living in Brussels knows that what that means. Defense is out. And so the important knowledge there in the defense field was just simply not transported. And we are struggling with that since 10 years or 15 years for single European sky. And of course, for the drones, this comes on us in a massive way. Because on drones, it's something new, and we don't have the appropriate institutions for that. And getting the institutions right in Europe is not an easy task, to get their relations right. And then, of course, it is as well a very political issue to move something to the European level. Recently, we have had a breakfast where you could see that there are arguments to say, well, but there will be smaller drones below 150 kilograms, so we should look more at the business opportunities and not so much regulation. So you can already see those who are a little bit more skeptical about more European integration will go for that argument, say, well, let's look first at the side where we don't need so much regulation, where we can enable business. And on the other side, you have those who want to have the security, the safety that the product they are making, they can send it to the European airspace. I think these is the tension we see today.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'd like to give the floor back to our two previous speakers before I open up to the audience. You need to go. Thank you very much for being here. I understand there's someone from Diehl, a representative of Diehl in the audience, right? So if there are any more questions to the private sector, ma'am, Ms. Schneider, right, you will be able to answer them. Thank you very much for being here. And I will now turn to Olof Ehrencrona and ask you to comment.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand the reason why we are so slow. And it's because that we deal with exponential technologies. If I walk 30 meters in that direction, I come 30 meters. If I do it exponentially, I will come 7.5 times around the Earth, actually. And you know the curve always looks like this. And we are dealing with a number of technologies that basically all develops in an exponential pace. It's ICT, it's materials, it's optics, it's the whole sphere of biotech. All of these technologies are either developing in exponentially or in a pace with double exponentiality as biotechs right now. So if you look at gene sequencing now, for example, you have a development that doubles the productivity and cuts the cost in half every second month right now. And the thing is that all these technologies are connected by one thing. See them as a circle. Materials, ICT, biotech, optics, materials. They are connected with one thing, and that's that they are guided by algorithms. It's software. It's all about software. And when we look at the specific technology as drones, we are in the bottom of the curve so far, and we are slightly going upwards. There's no sense of urgency in the institutions because they only see this flat change, the rate of change. And there is no sense of urgency in private business actually because they see this flat rate of change. And if you go to the researchers, there is no sense of urgency because they only see their own segment of this disruptive change. While there is a whole spectrum of technologies that actually are dependent and have synergetic effects with each others, and dependent on each other, and dependent on how smart algorithms we can develop. And this is a unique period in the history of humanity, because if you look backwards, the steam engine was one thing, electricity was one thing, marine technology in the 16th century was one thing. Sometimes they were connected, but not as connected as the technologies of today. And this means that we need to grasp a rather different view on research. And you were in it, I think it was very correct that we need to have to focus more on that. But I would say also, it also means that we should not only focus on what is defense, we should actually focus on what is dual capacity here. Because defense technology and civil technology is today very, very well connected.
Okay, so far in the debate, we've been looking at technology, we've been looking at institutions, we've been looking at our speed of reacting to events. We haven't looked at the moral factor, if I might call it that. But especially concerning drones, it's there. So Henna, my question to you is, I mean, you can comment upon everything else that was said, but my question to you specifically is, how do we address the hesitations and the actual the rejection of drones, RPAs, as something evil, something that is only meant to destroy, and something that shouldn't be promoted by European institutions or national governments?
Yeah, well, this discussion is ongoing about how demonized these drones are. I don't think we should either glorify nor demonize them. I think we should have a fact-based discussion. And like I said, the bad reputation concerning drones probably comes from the US, the CIA operations in Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, etc. And I think we have to learn from these mistakes. I think we need more transparency. And also the European Parliament has discussed this, that if we will have armed drones, they should be used only in war zones. Of course, if we talk about the US experience, it's a bit unfair just to because it's not black and white. I mean, if they were hunting down terrorists, they use you know, human shields, etc. So we have to see the big picture and be a bit fairer about this. But actually, if you think about civilian casualties, there are plenty of reports that say that drones lower the number of civilian casualties because of their precision, because of the good cameras, etc. So actually, they might help even in the war on terror. And maybe also what I said, that some people think that they are less human, but I don't know. weapon is a weapon? What is a human weapon? What is a less human weapon? I mean, if you use drone as a weapon, you can use it in other functions as well. And also it's been talked that since the operators are far away from the line, from the combat zone, that they are not putting themselves in harm's way, that it might become some kind of a video game or something. But I don't really see this. I mean, there are plenty of weapons that you use from a distance already. I mean, missiles, rockets, whatever. And I mean, if you have soldiers that have this kind of attitude and morals, then I think there's something wrong with the military training and the sort of with that country itself. It's not about the device, it's about how you train your soldiers, and in the end you have the chain of command and you have people responsible on how your country is behaving. But I think in general we have to have an open discussion and say what are the concerns and etc. And we shouldn't hide these problems either. Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much. I'd like to open it up to the public now, and we have the first question from the floor right here. Would you please briefly introduce yourself? Microphone is coming, is on the way. Would you please briefly say who you are and then ask your question? Go ahead. Anybody else would like to take the floor? Yes.
Do you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Bachmann, Department of War Studies, King's College London. You know, the ethical problems with distant arms do not come from a coward using it. The crossbow was already banned by the Pope to be used against fellow Christians a long time ago, and we had this thing over and over again in discussions on just warfare. The problem with unmanned aerial vehicles comes from the fear that sooner or later the connection of different technology will lead to the point where the weapon will make the decision on whether to engage in combat or not. And now you have not a vehicle that has no pilot. A combat UAV had 3 pilots, 2 who operate the machine and 1 in the background to assist on the decision on whether to fight or not. So that is not a big difference to a normal fighter jet then. But the ethical point is the one, do we control what the machine does? And this is where people are afraid of, not of another technique on how to kill somebody. Thank you.
Very important.
Can I just comment briefly?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the more and more we go into the autonomous kind of devices, I think these kind of issues rise. But at this point, we are still talking about remotely controlled devices. And to my understanding, we still want, I mean, the European Parliament has been vocal about keeping man in the loop. So I think this is something important to keep in mind.
Indeed. Yes, Olof, go ahead.
And this is very much about the whole discussion about artificial intelligence. And there are 2 schools, man-to-machine or the machine single-handed. And it will be very interesting to see which school wins, actually. My personal belief is the man-to-machine. The man-to-machine will probably carry the day. That's my personal view.
I mean, this is going deep into philosophy now, but there is an ongoing debate in the whole artificial intelligence community about, as soon as you try to write an algorithm that somehow represents what we call morals, it might actually be more humane. It might be more humane than the individual decisions of human beings. Now, it still scares us. The idea that machines would take the decision is totally scary. I admit that. But the point is that it's all in the programming. That would be my answer. But I think Ulrich, did you want to comment? I mean, how does the European Parliament see this question of the human in the chain?
Yeah, I think that was really the 2 points you have made were roughly reflecting what the members discussed when they did the resolution on the use of armed drones last year. Which was supported from the center right to the far left, which was amazing to see that they all wanted to come to a compromise. And that was, I think, the first sentence that was Michael Gala was saying, this was in the spirit of compromise, this text. And that said, we want to have that it is legal and ethical, and there is no issue with automation, but there is an issue with autonomous decision-making. And in particular, you already have systems which autonomously acquire targets, but then the decision to shoot is still a human decision. Or you have systems that are engaged when the target is acquired, and the moment to shoot is determined by the system as the optimal moment. But the combination of the two would be really dangerous, because it would be at the end the software engineer somewhere in the world who is writing the algorithm, who decides and who becomes the combatant. And that is, of course, impossible. All our legal system, international humanitarian law, is built on the idea of competence, and that the people are more or less somewhere tangible, and this becomes intangible. And I think this is one of the points. And for this year, the European Parliament has decided a very small pilot project on CSDP research, 1 million euros, just to start with, the first defense spending of the EU budget ever. And here, in the text of that budget decision, exactly the funding of autonomous decision-making is explicitly ruled out. That was the principal thing to be ruled out from the very beginning. And I think this gives an idea how in the Parliament things are seen. And I think the members have moved away from this issue of drones are really just bad, because it's the use of drones that is, of course, sometimes bad. But it's not the engine, the machine itself.
Very good. That's healthy.
All right, ma'am, you would like to ask a question?
Hello, my name is Naringa, and I'm a human rights worker. So I had a question for Hannah. Firstly, thank you a lot for the very interesting presentation. And I understood there's a wish to establish EU as an independent player when it comes to security and cybersecurity. But when referencing our international partners and possible cooperation, all I got was increasing EU partnership with NATO and the Americans. So I wanted to ask, don't you think that dividing international players into the good guys and bad guys could sabotage the image of EU as a really independent player in the eyes of other international countries? Because perhaps for them, our allies are the biggest aggressor.
Do you have any countries in mind which would like to cooperate with us? Because, well, I think in general, of course, we can do cooperation with any country that that would want to cooperate with us. But I think it's more natural for us to work with our close partners and allies, like-minded countries. And United States and European countries are close partners. I mean, with the TTIP, we will have even more common interests. I don't know, did I understand your question?
I think it's a very dangerous rhetoric, and
Really?
that doesn't make Europe seem as an independent player, because it makes us follow the steps of
Okay,
our
now
ally.
I understand. Okay, well, I think we can have at the same time cooperation with our American friends, but also I think we need to, be more independent in the way, like I said in my presentation, that we don't have to rely on American drones or assistance on American technology. We are basically now dependent on that. So I think we need to have more of our own know-how and material and devices. But I think we can have both ways, right? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I don't think we should be an independent player. I think we should be on the good side. And we need to be the good guys. And there will always be bad guys out there. There will be countries or organizations or
That's
whatever. But we should be the good guys. And what do I mean with that? Well, we should apply human rights standards also on this field.
Yeah, yes.
We should have, I've personally been involved in having 2 resolutions through the Human Rights Council, one stating that human rights offline should be also applicable online, and the second one stating that rule of law must be applicable in cyberspace. And we have done quite a serious work between the EU and the US and the member states of the EU in promoting human rights online as well as offline, and promoting rule of law online. There is obviously some sort of disconnection between what we are doing in the analog world, which is fairly okay, and some activities in cyberspace. But we need to get our governments and our authorities to understand that the standard that we apply in the analog world should also be applicable in the digital world, in the digital space. Then we will be on the good side, because we have developed open societies that are quite nice societies for hundreds of years. This could be done also in the digital space. But we should not be naive. There are other societies, closed societies, authoritarian societies, totalitarian societies, criminal societies, which have a totally different moral standard. And they can use this technology as well as we can. What we should do is to see that we are the good guys, and we should really try to live up to that standard.
Excellent remarks. Thank you very much. Who else would like to ask a question, make a comment? Sir?
Hello, Henrik Bieler, NATO Parliamentary Assembly. I'm the director of the Science and Technology Committee there. I wanted to poke your policy recommendations a little bit more and get some more concrete answers out of you on the drones side. You're talking about a European drone. And what do you have in mind, both in terms of R&D, getting to a drone, working together? I mean, European. Right now, we have European defense companies and some countries working together on certain drone projects. But were you advocating 28 member states drone? How do we get there? And then afterwards, how to own and operate it? I mean, we have you're talking in a report about AGS, Allied Ground Surveillance System in NATO. It took 20 years to get there, and only now we have now it's the commander who has control over it. But how do we use a European drone if you're talking about an EU drone? What do we do with it? Who controls it? Who does it belong to? I just want to get some more concrete information.
That's a really good question. Who wants to answer? Well, I think how the European drone will, if it will fly, I don't really know. I conducted these interviews last summer, and the experts I interviewed didn't really know what would be the framework for the European drone, how the EDA or the Commission would actually be involved. So I think it's still up in the air. I don't know, maybe you
Quite
have
literally up in the air.
up in the air, yeah. Maybe Ulrich has a more precise answer, but I don't know. Different countries have been doing this, bilateral, multilateral cooperation. Anything helps. I don't know what would be the European drone in the end. Would we have all the member states involved? Probably not. But in the end, I don't think we need to. At least if we have some countries working on the European scale, I think that would be a big improvement to the situation as it now is. I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer for you.
Ulrich.
Well, I have no answer on a concrete drone program as such. Well, there are programs around, for sure. What Michael Lange has said and is certainly the core point. We need to come up with a regulatory framework that is underpinned by standards and by the technologies. So everything that is now done that goes in a direction that later doesn't comply with standards and regulations is wasted money. And we have seen that with the grounding of the Eurohawk in Germany. Of course, it still flies, but it's not about the capacity to remain in the air. It's all the rest. I honestly have no answer how the actual making of a platform will be assembled. And of course, if we do that at 28, the only way to do that is through the EU budget. That is automatically paid by all the 28. Getting 28 member states together in an intergovernmental scheme is pretty much an issue, I think. I don't think that this will work. But the other side, of course, and then is a question, is that required? Is that needed, really? We have seen with Galileo, we have done something at the European level, at the EU level, because it was considered to be extremely important. So if drones are considered to be so important as Galileo, then it will certainly be done. If it's not considered to be that important, I don't think that it will be done in the way. However, the technology bit that was mentioned before, I'm pretty certain that this will be funded at the EU level, and the regulation and the standardization. EU standards, once they are published, 30 days later, they are standards which are applicable from that day on. They are law. And as we have strong regulatory and as well standardization links inter alia with China, very strong ones, European standards then have a capacity to go further. We have seen that in software-defined radio when we worked in EDA and the Commission together on that. So there are ways to lead from behind, maybe, or lead from below. That is possible through technology. And I think Europe is not bad in standardization and matching standardization and technology.
Anybody else? Sir.
Thank you. Soren from the Chinese mission to the EU. So it's just my personal comment, the comment to Hannah. You just mentioned that the use of the American use of drones in some countries, and we cannot say that it's a black and white issue because its aim is to fight terrorism. But I think it's especially for the case in Pakistan is a right around question. So you cannot, how to say, in the name of fighting terrorism than to violate the sovereign country's territorial space. And I think, and also the use of drone can make the less casualty of the military. But at the same time, it causes more casualty for the civilians in those countries. You can, from the report, we have seen that the civilian casualties are not all terrorists. So I think this is a very vital, important question. Human beings are always more valuable. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. To my understanding, in Pakistan, actually, the government had given some kind of blessing to American troops, but I'm not sure about this. But of course, I totally agree, and I'm not trying to say that the killings were justified or anything. And I think that is why we have to learn from those past mistakes. I think Europe can do better, and I think we have to also demand that our American friends do better on that. In that sense, of course, we cannot talk about our values if we don't respect them ourselves. So I think that is the main point.
Olof.
Yeah, what about who is going to build a drone? I mean, drones are built by students today. In US, you have an organization called Singularity University. They have a special department for students building drones. And there are, what is a drone actually? We have drone. If you go to the net, you can see drones that are catching balls or playing tennis or doing whatever. Or you have drones delivering pizzas, or you have drones that are used for military purposes. I agree. I think what the EU should do is focus on standards. And I think that we should also do another thing that I think is extremely important, and that is to start to have programming in school, coding in schools as a subject. It's just as important to learn coding.
In Finland, they have coding in schools.
Compulsory?
Probably not.
No.
Not yet.
I think it's just as important as
Swedish is compulsory.
Yeah, I know.
Maybe we should
I would say it's just as important as learning Swedish or Finnish. It's a language that you need to know, and it's a universal language. And there is a space out there that is divided. It's an open source space and another space that is the closed source. It's Apple versus Microsoft or whatever. The open source space is open for everyone that knows programming. They can develop their own, and they can adapt their own programs and their own software. And this is so important to know. And if you are going to be in the absolutely forefront in technology, you need to have a young generation that is just as good in coding as young kids in Asia or in the United States. And we are far behind still in Europe with regard to our curriculum. We were able to develop universities in this part of the world, and we were able to renew the universities in this part of the world. And of course, we would be able to renew our education system in this way. And I would say this is the basis. If you don't know the language for the digital space, you will never conquer the digital space, and you will never carry the day technologically.
All right, I would just like to come back to our Chinese colleague with the U.S. use of drones in Pakistan. Now, of course, there are all kinds of analyses and commentary about this, and indeed there are some very credible studies done by liberal American think tanks in Washington, as one by the Center for American Progress, that tries to elaborately prove that. At least as far as the avoiding of civilian casualties is concerned, the use of drones is statistically more effective, more moral than classical military instruments, such as, for example, fighter bombers or helicopters that would try to fight these terrorists. So, you know, it's not a question of saving military lives but risking civilians. No, no, no. It is a question of reducing civilian victims. That's one thing. The other thing that we need to consider is, for every use of drones, the United States Department of Justice has developed an elaborate procedure of how, you know, you cannot, it's not just like a military officer pushing a button and the drone flying off. No, there is an elaborate procedure of establishing that there is no other possible means to reach the target by conventional military force, that the target is indeed a danger, an imminent danger to the United States or its troops, for example, in Afghanistan. And then there are several stages in this process of decision-making that, yes, this operation can only be done by a drone strike. So, you know, it's not like someone decides on a whim to use a drone. That is not the way the US program works. And yet, indeed, as Hannah said, there are legitimate ethical questions about that program. And it's completely up to the European Union and its member states to decide what the standards are to guide any kind of European drone program if it ever comes into being in the future. So, you know, in that sense, this is up to us. But I do think that it's all too easy to morally condemn outright the American use of drones. There are some very good arguments in their favor. Now, we've got a question by Viet.
Hello, I'm Viet Nowotny from the Martin Center. I just like to take this argument in relation to the recent proposal or idea to set up an EU army made by Commission President Juncker. And there have been quite some skeptical arguments against that proposal. Well, who say, well, that's what NATO is for. Why do we need an EU army? So if we think about the military use of drones, how would you put this proposal into the framework of the debate about the EU army? If we need why do we need a military EU drone if we don't need an EU army?
Thanks very much. A very pertinent question. Do we have any other questions? Should we collect some? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's David. In regards to morally condemning the US, I think you make a good point that you can't just morally condemn a whole country or just action with certain drones. But I think it would be justified to maybe morally condemn some of the use of the drones, specifically second strike capabilities. And I think that would go in line with the comment of a colleague in regards to increasing civilian casualties. So when we discuss how Europe has to choose a higher standard, more grounds, as was said, I think that's something that should be taken into account, exactly how we or the plans go around to developing those and the interactions that we do have with our allies.
Okay. Anyone else? Back in the corner.
Hi, my name is Camille Schiens. I'm currently a trainee in the European External Action Service, actually with the European Union military staff. I wanted to talk a bit about cyber because we haven't really discussed it too much in this debate. What I was wondering is a lot of people are talking about cyber attacks as being the next big thing. But to my knowledge, executing an actual cyber attack is very, very difficult, and doing a lot of damage is something that we haven't really seen too often yet. One of the best examples that comes to mind is the use of the Stuxnet virus by the US to damage Iranian nuclear facilities. But that took 3-4 years of work by many specialists to produce this. So do we really think that cyber by itself, unsupported by any other form of military capabilities, is going to be the way warfare is going to go?
Okay, those are 3 questions. I'd like to give this back to our panel. Just to briefly repeat the points, we have the interrelationship between the EU army and the drones. We have the question of, nevertheless, civilian victims in relation to second strike capabilities of drones and the ethical dilemmas in the European Union. And we've got the question of cyber attacks. Who would like to go first? Hannah, would you like to?
Somebody else. I have
Olof.
to think a little.
Well, no, we have still no casualties on cyber attacks, no human casualties. So that's true. And Stuxnet is it's an interesting thing because if you reverse Stuxnet, you can send it, and so it's very difficult, or it's a rather dangerous thing also for those who uses it, because Stuxnet was developed to disrupt a certain product from a certain company, and of course it has a more general use than only for Iranian equipment for nukes, so for developing nukes. So I would say that it is very complicated to be efficient so far with cyber warfare. But on the other hand, when the world gets digitalized, of course, it also gets more vulnerable for attacks that actually has the digital environment as its main target. And this goes with the technique, so to say, or with the technology. So I don't think you can say that this is not a problem because it hasn't been a problem so far. I think it will become a problem. And it will be necessary for us to take precautions, actions to defend ourselves. Because there will be those who are capable enough to develop techniques to disrupt our systems. I notice that it is in the doctrine of the Russian military, the kind of the asymmetric warfare is something that the Russian military now believes they must develop to excellence because of the very simple fact that they don't have enough resources to have a symmetric warfare with the Americans. They say that NATO is our main enemy, but they don't have resources to tackle this enemy. Then they develop the asymmetric means of fighting a war. And those asymmetric means, I would say they are very competent. The Russians are very competent and competitive internationally with regard to cyber warfare and cyber attacks. And we have seen some signs of it, but there are other more modern signs, I won't go into details, that shows that they still develop this capacity in a rather fast pace, actually.
Ulrich Karok?
Yeah, thank you. As I have the Lisbon Treaty institutional things on my agenda besides the geeky things, at least this one. Sorry?
Isn't that geeky?
Oh, it's extremely geeky, but not for everybody. I think the Lisbon Treaty itself gives, at least for today, a definitive answer. It says that all military capabilities come from the member states, full stop, as well the civilian ones for CSDP, by the way. So whatever a European drone would do is not CSDP. Then it has to be given to the member states and then given back to the EU. It sounds odd, but I think there is a very good reasoning behind that. So that is, for me, the linkage between the two. And a European army would, of course, have to be the same, to be given to the EU by the member states. So it's nothing that the EU would possess itself under the current circumstances. And on the large-scale cyber attacks, I think there is, a long time ago, when I did some training on programming, that was still in BASIC and Pascal. Well, anyway. What I learned as well is that there is something that's called the law of requisite variety. And I think it was Mr. Ashby who has said something like, if you want to control a complex system, and complex is the word that we have to understand here, you need to have a control system that is at least as complex as the system to be controlled. And now imagine what that means if you really want to do a very sophisticated, complex cyber attack on a relatively sophisticated system, not on a company that is emitting news like we had on TV5. So really on a very large scale, I think it requires indeed an enormous capacity to get there. I think what is much more dangerous is that you build in the potential for failure of protecting yourself against cybersecurity already into a system. So like making hardware, making microchips, where the source of encryption is compromised, so that later on you can determine the number of attacks you need to break the system. So you have you know how to scale your attack. And that can be very dangerous, because the small things built into everything are very difficult to change. Just 10 days ago, my computer was taken away and exchanged because I had a virus, a relatively sophisticated virus on my machine. And when I asked, but I have plugged 2 of my 120 gigabit USB sticks to them, they said, well, you have to destroy them because they are no longer safe. The virus was too complex for that. Then I asked them, but I'm using a Mac at home. Then they said, oh, that's not a problem. The Mac is not an issue because it's for Windows. So still, the virus was complex, but not complex enough to go cross platforms. So I think that we are still safe, and with people being aware of the dangers and training them from school, I think this is a very, very good solution to these risks.
Just briefly back to the eminently important geek question. I would separate strongly between techno-geeks and political geeks. I'm a hybrid, but that's exceptional, I think.
Yeah, maybe just very, very briefly. EU Army drones, that's a very, very good question. I think in the end, even though cooperation inside NATO and NATO securing a collective defense, that's important. But I think in the EU, we really have to think, shouldn't we have more of our own capabilities and not rely on American drones, for instance? So I think in that sense, the sort of European defense cooperation is important. And creating this on the EU level, it's not happening. There are countries that are against it. But I think these sort of country groups that are working now. You have the Nordics working together, and you have some countries working on their own drones, etc. These could be some kind of a prelude for maybe some kind of a European army in the future, long run, maybe, I don't know. On cyber attacks, I don't know. I think technical know-how and all these advances so quickly. I mean, I think the ISIS hijacking the TV5 for such a long time, I think that came as a surprise to, I mean, the French government had emergency sessions, etc. So we don't actually know on what level the capabilities of these attackers are. And I don't think we want to wait until we have critical damage in our system, or until we have those casualties to beef up our cyber defense capabilities.
Okay, well, that brings us to a close, and just trying to summarize these two separate fields of disruptive technologies and what the EU and its member states should do about them. I have 3 points. I mean, definitely...
Are you becoming Alexander Stubb, or are you his fan? Because he always has 3 points.
He's not the one who invented that.
Really?
That principle... I mean, yeah, sorry to say. But now that the election is over, I think I can be open about that he did not invent it, I did not invent it. It's an old trick that you learn in Rhetorics 101.
The Greeks did, actually.
You know why in
have
jokes...
to reinvent the wheel.
You know why in jokes there's usually 3 policemen or 3, or a German,
Swede,
a Brit,
and a Finn, and a Norwegian,
that's right.
or something.
Anyway,
yeah.
so my 3 points in this case are that definitely on these both fields, cyber and RPAs, as different as they are, the EU has to make more of an effort to bring the member states together and to actually overcome this sleepy lack of speed, I would say, as Olof has emphasized several times. And the EU has the role of a catalyst here, whether we want it or not, but we have to be stronger on this. And second, very, very importantly, taking into account all the moral quandaries, especially with drones, nevertheless, I think the main challenge for us, but the area where we can also be successful, I think, is to be on the side of the good guys, as it was mentioned here. To be on the side of the good guys. And third, technology as such, don't fear it, use it. There is, in both debates about cyber, but especially on drones, you can see a very strong distrust towards technology, a tendency to demonize a technology that is sometimes not easily understood. And so to get ahead of the curve, I think that's the motto. So thank you all. Thank you for listening. Thank you for debating. And hope to see you very soon. Actually, our next event will be this evening on the war in Ukraine. And you're quite welcome to join us right here in the Stanhope as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good day.